thank you to all of you who have taken some time out on your Saturday afternoon to join us. As Corey said, I'm Dani McClain. I have the honor of being the library's writer in residence, which means that I host events throughout this year and workshops and office hours and all that. So please check out the writer in residence, search for writer in residence in the library site if you'd like more information about that. Today, I have the honor of hosting this event. And I have to say, it's personally pretty exciting for me because I'm somebody who has like dipped my toe in speculative fiction. I have, my favorites, but they're kind of they're kind of like, Octavia Butler, Ursula Le Guin, Octavia's Brood, the collection of short stories, Dark Matter, which when I was 20 years ago when I was younger, we'll say, that was kind of the book that Black folks who were interested in speculative fiction turned to. And so I'm so excited that today we have these people who are working writers in speculative fiction to talk to us about their work and their approach to the craft. And so I'm just, I think most of you who are here, you have a general sense for what speculative fiction is. I know in the write-up that Corey did to promote the event, she talked about it being a literary genre that encompasses any fiction with supernatural, fantastical, or futuristic elements. Some common types include science fiction, fantasy, or horror. And then as I was just preparing for this event, I got really curious about steampunk I've heard of, but steampunk, I need to know about that. Afrofuturism, I know we've got some people who work in Afrofuturism, magical realism. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce them by reading their bios, and this will be, and we'll just jump into the meat of our conversation. So with us today, we have B. Charisse Moore, who is a New Jersey native and graduate of Rutgers University. Moore's poems and short stories have appeared in several anthologies and journals, such as Chosen Realities, Summer 2020, and Faya Literary Magazine. At present, she is a 6th grade English language arts teacher, the host of More Books with B. Charisse on YouTube, the poetry editor at Faya Literary Magazine, and a graduate student at McDaniel College, where she's pursuing a Master of Science degree in Curriculum and Instruction with a concentration in writing for children and young adults. Her debut young adult magical realism novel, Dr. Marvelous Jin's Odd Scholars, is scheduled for release later this year. She lives in Baltimore, Maryland with her husband and precocious toddler. I have one of those myself, so more power to you. I hope that little one's off in the, giving you some space to do your thing right now. Zig Zag Claybourne is with us today as well. Zig Zag is the author of the novels The Brothers Jetstream, Leviathan, Neon Lights, and By All Our Violent Guides, as well as the upcoming Afro Puffs Are the Antenna of the Future. He's frequently seen at cons being deliriously happy and knows that one does not refuse karaoke when the mic is offered. His essays and stories have appeared in Apex, Giganotosaurus, I did okay with that, Galaxy's Edge, Strange Horizons, and other outlets. Find him on the web at writeon.com, and that is WRITE on RIGHT on.com. Krystal A. Smith is with us today as well. She's a Black lesbian writer of poetry and speculative fiction. Her poetry can be read at Entropy Magazine, Kissing Dynamite, and Serendipity. Her debut collection, Two Moons Stories, was released from BLF Press in 2018 and was a 2019 Lambda Literary Award finalist. Last but not least, we have Charlie J. Eskew. He's an author from Columbus, Ohio. His novel, Tales of the Astonishing Black Spark, winner of the Forward Indies 2018 Multicultural Award, was published by Lanternfish Press. His novella, When the Light Lay Still, a prequel to the Judge Dredd universe, was published in 2019 by Rebellion Publishing. He is an alumnus of Vona Writers Workshop and a member of Phi Beta Sigma Incorporated. Welcome, all of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. And thank you to the library and the Midwest Black Speculative Fiction Association, for sure, for putting on this event. So let's get into it. Let's start with, I'll put this first question to Zig Zag. But you know, as I've explained to you all, every question is to all of you. So after, you know, one person responds, feel free to jump in. So what drew you to this genre? How did you get started writing the type of work that you write?
I want to say it was the Twilight Zone, because I grew up watching that, and I always loved how they could take the silliest or the most outlandish idea and just transfix you with it. So that's what led me into it. But Octavia Butler is what really got me started down the path of trying to take what I saw in the world and change it into something that was just a slight bit more interesting than what it was, which is kind of how I define speculative fiction. It's sometimes it might not even have a science element or fantasy element or horror element, but there's just the way that you frame something makes you think about it just a little bit differently.
That's so true. Octavia Butler was definitely like kind of my intro into speculative fiction too. It's just a fun genre. I feel free like when I'm writing these things that are impossible. But Octavia Butler, the first book I read by her was Dawn, and I didn't know what was going on. I had to read it, and I was like, "This is incredible! I want to do that!" Like, like I am flipping out over here. Like, it was just such a different piece of writing that I'd never read anything like that before. It was incredible.
Dawn definitely is like a huge inspiration just because of how it so seamlessly blends, like, you know, social commentary with the speculative. And that was kind of, I feel like, you know, Dawn was this, no pun intended, like awakening as to what you can do with like speculative fiction and discussing just identity in general. I would say that when it comes to like what led me to this, I was just kind of a big nerd growing up, so I would always read sci-fi fantasy. I would like plow through Goosebumps books, and then, you know, graduated to more intense fiction, etc. But as far as like what made me want to write more Black speculative literature, I would have to say the one that really pulled me was Kindred, because of just how it like had such a soft sci-fi element to explore such an interesting idea of like what we would like, how we would interpret that trauma with our current, you know, just contemporary outlook. So that was probably one of the biggest ones that just like hit me in this particular genre. But yeah, just I love the idea of playing with the also I love satire, so I love playing with like absurdity, and it's easiest to do that with a speculative element.
For me, it was Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I was in the second grade, and I remember my teacher was so annoyed that I'd already read the book for story time. And so everybody's sitting around her. Remember, this is back in the 80s, so we're sitting around in a little circle, and I'm just, you know, so excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this part is coming, and this part is coming. And I remember the kids, you know, turn around like, shh. And like, there were like 3 Black kids in the class, and I was always the know-it-all Black kid, and everybody hated me. So Charlie and the Chocolate Factory definitely was the impetus for me wanting to write speculative fiction before I even knew what speculative fiction was, because, you know, that's like a fairly new term. You know, back then, that's not what we called it at all.
Genre,
It was just fantasy. Yeah, it's fantasy book. And then it was Octavia Butler. But for whatever, and I love Octavia Butler, but I felt like I'll never be able to write like that, honestly. That's just her style. She has this really, really bare bones style of writing that is not comparable to the way I write. So I didn't necessarily look at her work and say, oh my gosh, this makes me want to write. Though I've always loved her and I've read all of her books. The person that actually had me wanted to write is probably L.A. Banks. And L.A. Banks was just amazing to me. She was absolutely amazing in that she was absolutely amazing in that she just wrote accessible fiction to me. You know, the main character of the Vampire Huntress novels was a woman who was a spoken word artist, you know, and I was just shocked because here I am doing spoken word, and then she's writing about this vampire huntress that writes spoken word, and I'm like, wow, I think I can do this. And then I met LA, and she was amazing. I literally cried when she passed away, to be quite honest. And that's what brought me to speculative fiction writing.
I love, you know, it's funny. I grew up reading Roald Dahl and loving Roald Dahl, like all, you know, The Witches, that Fox book, like all of the
James and the Giant Peach. Mm-hmm.
It's just like, but I never really thought of that as speculative fiction. I just thought of it as weird story.
Right.
I mean, you're not wrong. I mean,
but it's interesting to put it in that, you know, to include him in that family. Charisse, let's stick with you. So you, all of you just talked about your inspirations and who got you, you know, pulled into writing in this genre. But how did you get started more specifically? So what was your own process of getting started with the writing? And you all are all published authors. So if you could also talk about how it went from just being something that you do for your own enjoyment to actually writing for publication.
I started writing when I was very young, but my first love was poetry. And looking back, I started to write speculative poetry again before I even knew what that actually was, back in college at Rutgers. And like I remember writing a chapbook, and it was called 40 recipes of voodoo spells or something like that. And I would do all kinds of interesting things with my poems, where I would make recipe poems. And you know, there was just like a list poem, but it was a poem that was in the list form of a recipe for love, or love potion, or and I started to perform around the country, and I did a lot of slamming. And then I started to teach, and I just recognized that my students weren't reading books with characters that looked like them. And I just said to myself, you know, of course I'm not going to stop writing poetry, because I continue to write poetry, but you know, this is like the early 2000s. And I said, oh my God, you know, this isn't right. And then I started to think back to my own experiences growing up in a town that was roughly 90% white, and never, ever reading any books, ever, with characters, you know, that looked like me. And I said to myself, you know, I need to be writing fiction. And I remember back at Rutgers taking a fiction course and dropping it because it was so intimidating. Fiction has rules, strict rules that you have to abide by. And that's what I love about poetry. Poetry, you know, there's such freedom in it. You know, if I don't want to capitalize the personal pronoun I don't have to. You know, if I want to, you know, in this line here, if I want to have one line, 2 line stanzas throughout, I can do that. And you can't do that with fiction. And I was really, as a young adult, very, very bothered by that. So I dropped that particular class and stuck with poetry. But then I said, you know what, I need to get more acclimated with this genre. And so I started to take more graduate classes that helped me to develop the craft of fiction writing. And then I just started to read more fiction. And I found myself just captivated by Butler and then L.A. Banks. And so I read all the L.A. Banks I could get my hands on, all the Butler I could get my hands on. And then I started to notice, oh, well, who's this person and who's that person? And, you know, I met Milton Davis. This is like the late 2000s. And we all formed a bunch of us. Zig Zag, were you in that group? That very, very early group?
First group, no.
Okay, so like there was this first group in 2000, in the late 2000s, and not even like, maybe 2007. And it was a bunch of, Black authors who found each other through this State of Black Science Fiction group, online. And this was before Facebook, because at that point, Facebook was still for college students only. And so we just found each other and we would just write. And then, Milton started to put together these amazing anthologies, that would give us opportunities to write more in the genre. And the more I read and the more I started to analyze the writing process, I think the better my fiction got and the more comfortable I got with it. But I'm the type of person that I need instruction in the craft. And I'm a huge believer in going to school and receiving direction from individuals who know how to write, and that's really been my story, and then FIYA Literary Magazine explodes on the scene. And so, I'm reaching out to FIYA and I'm looking, okay, how can I get published in this great magazine? And one of my early poems was published back in 2019. And now I find myself on staff. So that was pretty much my journey, to speculative writing in general. Just first finding other people who wrote, speculative fiction, because there's this belief that we're all in these little silos. And oh my God, I'm the only Black person who likes this, because no one else was around me, who read it. My friends had never heard of Octavia Butler, you know what I mean? And so I'm telling them about it and they're like, that sounds kind of weird. And they just kind of go on about the business. So I had to really seek out people. And so thankfully, with the web, I was able to do that.
Thank you. So the question is to, help us connect the dots between, you get turned on to this genre and then you start writing. And then, like most writers, at first you do it kind of for fun or just to build the chops. And then eventually you're pitching, and or at least I'm a journalist, so we pitch, but you're, you're getting published. And so talk a bit about how that process has looked for you.
So I got started with poetry as well. Shout out to my high school English teacher, Constance Ramey. She was incredible. We read these incredible stories and poems in class. And she started this like a literary club. And so I grew up in a small town. And so she would take us to these cool places and let us get like the history of it and let us practice writing. And she would submit our stuff. I'm pretty sure she paid for, some of these submissions and things. And that's kind of how that started. And so, I got a few poems published that way. And then it was just addictive. That rush of, I'm a published, artist, writer. And you keep writing and you keep submitting. And then, you find out about anthologies and you're like, okay, I want to try that. So you submit to a few anthologies and that takes off. And then, sometimes you put your work out there and then sometimes people come to you and it's like, hey, I saw this thing you wrote. Curious if you would like to, submit something for this upcoming call. And that's really, fantastic when people see your work and they see something in it. That is how I came to publish with BLF Press. I had submitted a few pieces for a collection, and then the publisher was like, hey, I think you could do an entire collection of short stories. What you got? Send me some stuff. So that is how Two Moons came about. And that was a really, really fun, process. And then from there, you kind of, you meet people and you talk to folks and like, oh, well, hey, I'm submitting here. So, I think you could do it too. So you just kind of follow the little trail of different things that are open to you, it's fun and sometimes it's frustrating, but you learn a lot. So I'm still with BLF Press, working with them and doing other things as well. Just sending work out. Like Sharice was saying, you write with people, you learn different things, you meet folks, and you just kind of have fun with it and you learn. And you find some really good friends, you find some really good writers, and it just becomes kind of like your world. So I'm still submitting things and asking folks, hey, what y'all doing? Like, you want to, do you want to write? Actually after this I have writing group, so you don't miss writing group. You show up and you support each other and you help each other, and it's such a good community. So it's definitely not you're not alone when you're doing this. You definitely reach out to folks, and it's fun. It's a process.
And I like how you mentioned that you're not alone, because we have that stereotype of the writer as you sitting in your room typey all by yourself. But
Yeah.
there's a huge community out there, and writers are extremely generous. Because my story is way back in the day, I was ready to give up on writing because I didn't want to write this. I mean, especially in the speculative fiction world, there's a tendency to want the same story that somebody else wrote last month. And I didn't want to do that. So I was getting ready to give up. And I live in Detroit. So Beverly Jenkins, I reached out to her. This was like way, way back in the maybe mid 80s. And I didn't think I was going to get an answer back from her, because it's like, Beverly Jenkins is way up here, and I'm nobody. Beverly met with me, looked over my stuff. And before that, I had read her. So I knew that it was possible to write it within genre, but still put your own spin on it. Because if you read her romance novels, they are not like the typical, Fabio on the cover romance novel. So she met with me, and it was a great moment of community where she basically just let me know, do what you're doing, have fun with what you're doing, and you will get past all the other barriers. And so that was my inroad to it, just that sense of community, that sense of fun, and just knowing that you can write what you want to write and get it out there.
Yeah, and I would agree. I don't want to diverge too much from the original question, but I love like what you're talking about with community, because honestly, like well, to answer the question, like I've been writing all my life, but as far as serious writing, I started writing my first novel when I was in college. And then my professor, who's still a very close friend with me today, she kind of, gave me the, I will show you the world moment of like, here's this author and this author and that author. And like, here's this whole like genre of Black satirical fiction. Here's this whole genre of this and this, and kind of opened up my world as to showing me all the different things we can do by bending genres and blending them and things like that. So I would say that's kind of what started me off with serious writing. And then I shot out my novel to a number of different agents. And then when that just wasn't really getting much attention, I turned to the small presses, which very glad that I did, because I would say that there's kind of a, nothing against like larger presses, but with small presses, there's such a passion for these projects and just a love of literature in general, that there's a kind of a focus on not just, how can we get this project out, but how can we reach people with this project? So that was really important to me. And Lanternfish has always been good about publishing really weird stories. And I still work with them I'm working on a sequel to the Black Spark novel. And I'm also working on some other projects. But as far as the community aspect of it is I tried to start a writing group here in Columbus, Ohio that got, we got some traction on meetup.com, but it wasn't until like I really started to like seek, I would say like through like AWP and then other avenues like that, different types of writers groups that kind of more coalesce around like my particular like genre, that I really felt connected to community. And then in Vona, that was like an experience that was so powerful, because when you're a writer of color in this industry, you start to feel kind of like you're, alone in a meadow when it comes to your ideas and your viewpoints on certain topics. in certain experiences that other writers just don't have, such as even as something as small as like reviews, and dealing with legitimate reviews, legitimate critical reviews, and then reviews that are solely like antagonistic based on you discussing identity. So just being able to find a space where you can discuss things like that was and is extremely important. But yeah, no, I would say just writing has been probably one of the many, like, you know, key factors of me just surviving 2020. So yeah.
I really appreciate this point about, you know, people being antagonistic, like the larger literary community being antagonistic to writing that addresses identity head on. And let's talk about that. So just however that lands with you, like if you have something you want to say on that topic, but I'll say, you know, one way of thinking about the question is, how do your various identities shape what you create? I think that's such a good example that Zig Zag gave of like Beverly Jenkins. That's her name, correct? The romance writer. Like, it's not your typical Fabio romance, right? Like, she puts her spin on it. But, you know, it could be in terms of race, gender, sexuality, class background, ability, status. Like, how do all of the ways that your identities come together influence and shape what you write? Krystal, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. I feel like just in my daily life, I'm so hyper aware of how I have to walk through the world. And it's really hard to like divorce that from the stuff that I write. I don't care for trauma porn, like that seems to be all people want from Black folks. Oh, tell us about your struggle. Tell us. I have joy. I have, like, you know, adventure. I have, you know, just magic, right? And I want to, you know, share that. I also know that people are going to question whether or not Black girls do that, you know, and it's difficult sometimes, but I'm Black, I'm a lesbian, I am, you know, all these different things. And I don't ever want to shy away from that or appear to be ashamed of that, because there is some little Black girl, a lesbian girl, you know, out there who has never seen herself on an adventure, you know, like doing magic that helps someone, you know? And so I feel like it's really hard to separate those things sometimes. And it's important that people see that. I want to bring joy. I don't want all of our stories just to be slavery and hard time. You know, that's not fun. You know,
not another slave movie. Like, like I feel like, oh my gosh,
it's hard. Yeah. So yeah, I definitely, you know, sometimes it's not on purpose. Sometimes it is, you know, just how the things are tethered together, but it does show up in my short stories. It shows up in my poetry. And I'm never going to shy away from that. I definitely write for Black folks.
Me too. Speaking of adventure, my YA novel, Dr. Marvelous Jen's Odd Scholars, is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory meets Jurassic Park meets Kindred. And it is an adventure story. As a child, my mother, when she could never tell me that we were going to Six Flags Great Adventure. Oh my God, I would worry her to death. It was so bad. And I mean, the same thing like with Disney World. She told me we were going to Disney World maybe like a week before. She had to keep it from me. And so like amusement parks are my thing. And so I started to, so this is funny, but I was a huge Michael Jackson fan. All right, when I was a kid. So this is the 80s, early 80s, you know, I was in love with Michael Jackson. I wanted to be Michael Jackson. It was this weird mix. I didn't know. I just loved it. And we all know what an icon he was back in the day.
Yeah.
So I loved this Say video that I watched when I was a kid.
Yeah.
With Paul McCartney. And so I started to ask my mom, like, well, what is that? And she said, oh, it's the medicine show. And so then she had this love affair with the Medicine Woman show. Do you guys remember that?
Oh, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman.
Yes, she loved it.
Yeah.
She really loved it. So I started to become borderline obsessed with that time period. And so I uncovered all these amazing facts, and I happened to stumble upon two things that changed everything. The first was Black Herman. Black Herman was a magician during the 19-teens and 1920s, and he was also a Garveyite. And at his shows, he would sell these talismans to ward off racism. So when I found this little like crazy, like remote information, I lost it. So then I'm still digging. You guys know about going down the rabbit hole, right? When you're
Oh, yeah.
going down the rabbit hole. Oh my gosh, I find out they're colored amusement parks. Literal amusement parks built by us. Yes, and for us during Jim Crow. So I'm like, oh no, this is a story. So my story is about this kick-ass Black Garveyite female magician who actually gets enough money from Garvey, she's also a Garveyite, to form this magical and mythological creature amusement park. And she tries to find kids, teens from around the country, to compete to be the very first to tour this park. And so it's just adventure, you know what I mean? And I remember just, I don't know how many times I've seen Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, or Jurassic Park. I just love this idea of parks and rides. And the park is also called the Motherland, and it's an ode to African history. And I remember being on the safaris. You guys remember in the 80s, you could go and drive your little car through the safari. Can't do that now, that's unethical now. But back in the day, you could do that. So I said, oh my God, I'm going to, look at these mythological creatures from Africa that I just don't see. So I ended up finding tons of mythological creatures. And I said, what if there's a part of the park that's like a safari, but it's filled with mythological creatures from Africa? And so that's their adventure. And I agree, just adventure and joy. There are some heavy things that do happen because it takes place in 1920, so of course, this is a time period of tremendous trauma, but also tremendous survival and success for Black people in this country. And again, I'm just obsessed with that time period and how Black people thrived in these communities and how self-sufficient they were. And that's what I write about. So history really, really, really pushes me in my writing. And that's how my identity shines through.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, no, I love, and it's you bringing up like the amusement park and things like that. I mean, this kind of goes into what I wanted to say, but it made me think of last night. I was watching this new Netflix movie called Vampires in the Bronx, and it was amazing because it did everything that I think like Black speculative fiction should, and like one discussing things in subtext such as like gentrification and other issues, while also showing fun and just showing joy. And yeah, it had dark tones, but a dark tone doesn't have to mean as Krystal pointed out, trauma porn, where it's just kind of this, I don't know, it's so odd to me when I see all the recurring slave movies that pop up with these grand budgets and designs, and it's just like, I feel like, I don't know, I was talking to the professor I mentioned not that long ago about this, where when we're talking about chattel slavery, it helps to put it in a narrative that has finality to it, where there's kind of a means to say, well, that got handled, the end, and then Barack Obama. But yeah, so I feel like there's a danger there of like just shaping those as like the stories of identity. That's why like Watchmen was so powerful to me recently, when we had, well, for one, I think it was by far had the best superhero origin story ever created. I can't think of his name, but he had the noose costume. But then also, I feel like it talked about issues that we just don't see discussed often, like the Tulsa massacre. And as far as how identity plays into what I write, I feel like you almost have no choice, because somehow it's going to bleed through, even if my character isn't Black or POC whatsoever, even if my character is of a different gender than I am. Like, I still feel like no matter what, my experience in America will bleed through in discussing the politics of being an other, of being, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I do feel that when it comes to discussing my identity, I find it therapeutic because you can kind of find ways to show a side of the non-monolithic experience of being Black in America that people kind of don't see. Like, I write the protagonist in Black Spark is like a blurred who, you know, deals with these issues of invisibility, but also heightened visibility when it comes to the negative aspects of you know, perception of POC in America. So it's always kind of a reckoning with the juxtaposition of like who we are and who we're told that we have to be, I guess. But yeah, no, so identity is super important in discussing these stories.
Yeah, and that point you just made about who we're told we have to be is crucial to it, because especially in this industry, we're always told. I mean, we still have that old chestnut thrown at us that Black people don't do this, Black people don't do that. When you've got a Black woman who's won the Hugo 3 times in a row,
Yeah.
only person. So Black people do that. We read that, we write that, we always have. But yet we still have the industry that says Black people might go on an adventure, but they've got to suffer, really suffer during that adventure. Mm-hmm. And that whole essence of, you know, your identity is only valid if you have suffered in order to reach joy. I reject that big time, because I did an adventure book, and the tagline is saving the world one last damn time.
Yeah.
It's about these 2 brothers who go around basically saving the world all the time, and they never get credit for it. Mm. And it's a fun, goofy book because it's also got a giant psychic whale in it. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna do this simply because there is no onus on them to suffer for what they're doing. You know, yes, the Black experience is full of suffering, but not every Black person is walking around every day shackled to that. And
Right.
And that is the identity that I put into what I do.
I love this conversation. I'm just like, thank you all. Just, you have me thinking so many things. So this came up, Charlie just mentioned Watchmen, right? It seems like we're in this moment where it's a hot moment for Black storytellers and Black creatives who are working in science fiction, speculative fiction, horror, fantasy, thinking about Watchmen, incredible. Lovecraft Country, Jordan Peele's work, his movies. I know he had a TV show that I didn't catch, but N.K. Jemisin just won the MacArthur Genius Award. Why do you think that there's more of a platform for an interest in this work coming from Black people right now? And I mean, it seems like it. I can't, even something like, what was that HBO show? Oh, it just went out of my head. It'll come to me and I'll mention it. But why do you?
Assure You?
Well, I mean, that's interesting. That has some elements as well. But this one is it's by a Black man. I'll Google it real quick and mention it. But why do you think we're getting, you know, people who create this kind of work who are getting more attention and bigger platforms and budgets for this right now?
Yeah, I feel that, I mean, I hate to be cynical when it comes to these things, like as far as like how there's this heightened visibility, but for a book that I'm working on, I'm kind of doing some nonfiction reading, and I was reading Black Against Empire, which is kind of like an amazing book that goes into the history of the Black Panther Party, and there's these moments of awareness that kind of just explode in society where, like for instance, back when Fred Hampton, when he was murdered, there was this swell of kind of community support around the Panthers and kind of the injustice that occurred. And like I hate to say, but like it always does, it kind of slowly dissipated. Like there was this like almost a slow resignation of, okay, now we're back to how the world is. And I like to say that this time feels a little different, with just kind of how people are, not people, but how corporations are actually putting money behind some of their statements, and making certain changes, small sometimes, but sometimes larger than I would have expected. But I feel like because this view on racial injustice that we have right now, some are coming out of a place of actual like altruism and wanting to do their part and putting kind of more resources into telling these stories that have always been worthy of telling. It's just that there's been this, it always comes down to the bottom dollar of like, will this make us money? Like being the first question, not who is this representing? So unfortunately, I do think it's part of that capitalistic idea of, oh, well, people will actually pay for these right now, and we're going to back them. And as cynical as that is to say, I feel that it's something that can be capitalized on to use to make a broader point and to reach more people. And because I feel that art is kind of the most direct access to society, like in all its forms. Like, look at how many people watch Marvel movies, things like that. Like, you know, look how many people were moved by Black Panther. Look how, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel that there could be some negative reasons why we have this swell of sudden interest in work that always should have had interest. But I think it's kind of a great thing that's occurring and something to utilize.
I agree with Charlie. You know, it's sad to think that way, but folks don't generally do anything unless it benefits them. But then on the flip side, because I do have a smidge of optimism, I feel like, you know, Black artists and Black creatives, they know what they're capable of. They know what they're doing, and they love their work so much, and that they are so determined. We are so determined to create and to make these things for our communities. And if other people like it, that's cool. That's great. But we are doing it because, you know, we get told no a lot, you know, creatives all across the board, we get told no a lot, but we still do it for some reason. And to continue working on your craft and continue doing what it is you love, you will eventually, you know, get some recognition, regardless of, you know, if it's huge, if it's small. You know, you feel really great when a reader or someone says, "Hey, I read your story," and that was
best feeling.
It was really fun, you know, like I laughed, cried, you know, it feels really great. And that, you know, regardless of how big the paycheck is, you're like, hey, I did what I set out to do. A couple people said it was fantastic and they enjoyed it. And yes, I'm on the right track. I'm going to keep doing it. So people they have been working for so long, so hard. And, you know, it's starting to come to the forefront. Sometimes the right person has to see it for it to hit, you know, in a certain way. But yeah, we're out here working, and it's starting to come through. People are getting on the train. So yeah.
And another place where people are getting on the train is in education. This is my 12th year teaching, and I actually write curriculum for Baltimore County Public Schools. And I have for the past 2 summers. And I know the summer before last, I had conversations like, okay, this should not just be a Greek mythology unit. We need to have a world mythology unit. And sometimes I would do my own thing. And, you know, this might be what you want me to teach, but guess what? I'm also incorporating this as well.
Yes.
And I remember giving them like a final project, and it was a choice board, so they could do anything they wanted after they chose a mythological creature. But I barred them from choosing mythological creatures from Europe, you know, because no, you're not going to research a unicorn. You're not. Okay, we know unicorns. We've known unicorns for a long time. Let's go somewhere else. And it was really cool to see the students, you know, researching a Groot slang from South Africa, or researching, you know, the Abata, which is the African unicorn, or the Jingu, which is the Cameroonian mermaid. You know, it was really cool to see them researching these different things, or Quetzalcoatl, you know, which is the Central American dragon. And they really enjoyed it. And it was probably the most, I got the best feedback from that project than I had from any other project I did that entire year, you know, because it was so inclusive. And we also can't ignore the fact that, hello, like, our communities are turning brown. The United States of America is turning Black and brown, you know? And so we're having a lot of conversations in Baltimore County Public Schools about, hey, what kind of books can we get on this approved list? You know, and I'm always making, you know, suggestions, like I suggested Nnedi Okorafor, you know, for Mythology Union. I said, you know, Akata Witch, let's do Akata Witch. Take a look at Akata Witch. Take a look at Tristan Strong, Punches a Hole in the Ground, in the Sky. Take a look at these different books, you know, take a look at Race to the Sun, you know? So I'm trying to give them different ideas so that we can inject this into our curriculum. And so it can, you know, it can bleed forth, you know, so that we can really expand the canon, because, you know, our students also need to be exposed to that. And over the summer, I did an Indiegogo campaign for a middle school Afrofuturist textbook. And I got overwhelming support. We raised over $7,000, and there's so many different authors that are going to be a part of it. Finneson J.L.A. Clark is going to be a part of it, Tyann Bajez, Tanana Review, you know, so many people, Linda Addison, Cherie Renee Thomas, like it's just amazing. So I think that the more we push into different directions and different corners that we didn't think needed that push, I think that it's going to be undeniable that this interest is here, it's here to stay, and we may as well continue to pour into it.
Yeah, and I want to also say that there's a certain authenticity that is going behind a lot of the works now that people have been hungering for a very long time. Because before, if we got, you know, representation in books or movies, it was always, you know, well, this is what we think Black people are going to like and do. Chadwick Boseman, when he came onto the scene in Civil War and pretty much just took over that movie, it was because he played that character in such a way that the authenticity jumped off the screen. And nobody cared about anything else that was happening in that movie until he came on screen. And the same with the Black Panther movie. There was, you know, the representation behind the cameras mattered a whole lot for that movie. I know somebody had put out a joke a while back saying, can you imagine Black Panther if J.J. Abrams had done it? And it just chilled all down my
Mystery
spine.
box.
I didn't want to think about that, because if that had happened, that would not have been the juggernaut it was, and we wouldn't see this huge boom in interest that we're seeing now. So the authenticity is, I mean, everybody on this panel is writing from a place of authenticity.
Yes.
And people who are reading I mean, I'm looking at some of the comments in the chat, and people are just loving the B. Sharice's, what you were talking about with your book. That comes through, and it's not that we never had an audience for Black spec fic. It's that the speculative fiction that included us was always coming from a place of inauthenticity.
Facts.
So I just want to echo, yeah, the chat is lit. Y'all are having fun. I'm glad. And so I posted that we have some time we have 9 minutes left, so we have some time for questions. There's one that's already popped up that I'll share. But the name of that HBO show I was trying to think of was Random Acts of Flyness. Thank you, Renee, for remembering what I was trying to say. Okay, so one question that's come up. Tell us about the unexpected joys or frustrations of working the industry side of speculative fiction.
I would say one of the unexpected joys is just hearing from people directly when it comes to, because, you know, we all are huge readers in order to be writers. So like, we know that feeling of like connecting to a work and feeling like you know, you have like this connection to someone you never met before through their words and internal. So like when somebody reaches out to me and says like, hey, this really stuck with me, or hey, this was really funny or cool, or like this made me feel something, it's just like I never expected to have that, and then having it is just mind-blowing every time. Unexpected downsides, I would say, are sometimes something I touched on earlier when it comes to like racial kind of commentary about like specifically critiquing the fact that I'm discussing my experience as a Black person in America, and how dare I, because I have one review that said, I'm never putting this in my library because, you know, I would never say these like awful things about white people, which I never felt like I did. I just kind of said things that have actually happened, but you know, that's a whole other thing. But like moments like that where it's just this unexpected like pushback on just that status quo, like of any experience that's not your own, that was kind of mind-blowing and unfortunately affirmed fears is all. But yeah.
Yeah,
For me, go ahead, Zig Zag.
I was just gonna say, I agree with that sense of connection that you get. Like, you know, there's nothing better for a writer to get than that little email that pops up saying, hey, just read your book, loved it, or whatever, anything. Just is that's always unexpected to me. I never expect that, and always am overjoyed to get it. But as far as the I wouldn't say it was an unexpected downside, because in the industry, I mean, Bill Campbell from Rosario Publishing told me something a few years ago. He said, the industry is not built on inclusion. Therefore, it's on us to deconstruct it and rebuild. So when I get that rejection saying that we love it, but it's not the direction we're going, which generally is code for, you know, it's too Black. Basically. I don't get bothered by that so much anymore, because I know it's there, I know it's coming, and I know that, you know, when that wall goes up, I just do like this and keep going.
Yes.
Love that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. For me, one of the unexpected joys is probably finding Fire Literary Magazine.
Yeah.
Fire has been nominated for a Hugo a few times, and it's also won a World Fantasy Award. So that has exposed all of us at Fire to some interesting you know, crevices of the industry that I know I wasn't aware of at first. And an ironic story, I was querying in the beginning of the year, and I'm still dealing with rejection. It's difficult. And I think everybody on this panel knows how rejection feels, you know? And I was rejected several times, you know? And so I kind of just took a break. And that's when I had the idea to create, you know, the Indiegogo campaign. And, you know, for those campaigns, you have perks. And so I had a short story that I'd written. I thought it was pretty good, you know, so I added that as a perk. And, you know, I'm going through the list, and I think we had over 200 or 300 contributors. So by the, you know, 50th contributor, I'm just like 2 o'clock in the morning writing, thank you. You know what I mean, for your contribution, because I wanted to make sure I wrote personalized emails to everyone who contributed. And so I just, you know, wrote a thank you and sent off my little short stories to Perk, and that was all to one of the contributors. And so the next day I get an email like, hi, I'm Dani McClain from Fuse Literary Agency, and I really loved your short story. And, you know, what are your plans for writing? And I'm just like, what? And it was so bizarre, because months prior, literally in January, I queried one of her agents, because she's the partner. I queried one of her agents, and I was rejected for the same exact, you know, work. And so we get engaged in this conversation, we really click, and like she believes in my writing, and that's how I received my agent, you know, which is like really kind of, I don't want to say bizarre, but it's really not the norm, You know, like I didn't query her. She actually came to me and asked me for more work. You know, so I think that's one of the most positive things, you know, and my relationship with Lori has really blossomed. She's awesome. And she's really supportive of Black writers. And I appreciate her. So yeah, that's a positive story.
You know, let's get this one last one in. We only have a few minutes, but this is such a great question. How do you deal with the con scene? There are a lot of issues that make them untenable for Black and POC writers.
Ooh, that's a big one, because there are some cons that are just, as soon as you step in, you can feel that prickly on your skin where they're like, okay, why are you here? And then there are other cons where it's complete opposite. There's no formula to dealing with them. It's just know that when you go in, either have your backhand ready or your armor ready, because you will run into somebody that's going to step up on your nerve. I don't care what kind you go to, there's going to be at least one person who's going to step on your nerve, and you got to navigate that.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I would say like certain conventions I go to have been like insanely amazing experiences, but some like certain library conventions, certain like book conventions, depending unfortunately on the area, you can kind of get a feel as to, one, am I going to sell anything today, and two, how are people going to receive me? Because when they walk by, like as far as like, you know, having your table set up and everything, I kind of get the gist as you were saying a moment ago, like when you walk in, you can kind of get that little spider sense as far as like how this is going to go. So I always make sure to have tools with me to work, because if I'm not getting any traffic, I might as well use this time to get something done. I always am very genial and welcoming, but I don't, and no one ever should, go out of their way to be a, I don't know, like you want to be a salesperson when you're selling your own work, but there's a difference between like making a mockery of yourself and then also just believing in your own ability.
Right.
And then I always try to research to the conventions that I'm going to sometimes as much as you can, because as I'm sure you're all familiar, sometimes the most you have is a few pictures and pay us $100 to set up a table or something like that. So other times you have like a lot more engagement and feedback. I would say the best convention I've ever done and will return to once that's a thing again is there's a convention. It's like a Black nerd convention, BlurredCon, out in DC, that is phenomenal, and it's just such an inclusive place that I would say seek out conventions and find out what their their morals are, I guess, too, as to what they really are trying to do.
And in Atlanta, there's Black Tasticon. So please check that one out too.
And FireCon is next week. So
Yeah.
yes, virtual FileCon is all virtual next Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I think tickets are sold out, but if you go to the fire.com website, firelitmag.com website, then there's still some things that I believe are available. And I'm actually moderating a panel next Sunday on querying in Black. So yeah, I think there's a lot of cons that Black people are starting to develop, and other people of color are starting to develop because of that feeling, so hopefully once, everything runs its course, with COVID, and we come back in person, we can and have more of those conventions that we can attend and feel totally comfortable.
Yes. And everybody, please get a subscription to Fire Magazine.
Yes. Yeah.
You will thank me for it.
Yes, please do.
Trying to take myself off mute. So I want to just close out because we're at time, but could each person just take just a brief moment to say if folks want to find you online or keep up with your work, if you have like a Twitter handle or what Instagram, the best way that people can follow you and stay up to what you're working on.
Sure. My website is krystalasmith.com. And I'm on Twitter. I like funny stuff. Author K.A. Smith on Twitter. And you can get my book from blfpress.com.
I can be found, I've kind of taken a slight social media break, but I'm getting back to it soon. So you can find me on Twitter at CJ Eskew. And that has the URL to my website, which I would give, but I unfortunately am not allowed to move it over to the new domain for 60 days. So you'll have it then. It's just going to be eskewaf.com. And then also I have an Instagram, author CJ Eskew, and a Facebook page, author CJ Eskew. And I just, I'm keying in my Twitter handle in the chat now. Thank you.
And you can
go ahead.
no, please go ahead.
Okay. Twitter, it's Sharice_B. Facebook is B Sharice Moore. Please go ahead and send me a friend request. And Instagram is B Sharice. And my website is bsharice.com. And there'll be some things coming up, to pre-order the novel through MV Media when it's available either late next month or early December.
And y'all can find me on Twitter at ZZ Claybourne. I put it in the chat too. I've got a new book that's about to drop, so be forewarned. If you do follow me on Twitter, y'all gonna hear a heck of a lot about that.
Yes.
As we should.
Right. That's what it's for. That's what we writers use our social media for.
There we go.
Self-promote is not every, your publisher doesn't always do it for you. So we have to be our own biggest promoters. Thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to the library and to Midwest Black Speculative Fiction Alliance. Thank you to our panelists. This has been such a great conversation, and I wish you all the best of luck with your projects. And I know that we'll be following so that we can copy your next books when they come out. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, everybody.
Take care.